Uh, I think I'm going to do this kind of in a brief way because I'm interested in the DESI stuff, and I presented this before, although not these slides probably, but this general idea. But and this is more the work of Hannah. So what this is Hannah. So I'll give the general framework here is that I work in a sort of parallel, I'll call it sister group to this called HECAP Plus, High Energy Cosmology and Astroparticle Physics for Sustainability, and sort of adjacent groups. And we picked a couple of astro groups that I work in, cosmology and astroparticle, to not sort of conflict as much with A4E. And that's, it's centered on particle physics and its sustainability in particle physics. So colliders, and well, mostly colliders and labs like that, and what life cycle assessment. And so there's a different sort of projects within it. And one of the projects that we were looking at was let's make a subcategory in archive for this. This is sort of how we can make sustainability more core to the different projects. So if we're working on the FCC, the Future Circular Collider, whatever it's called, at CERN, and people are writing papers about this is where we should get the cement, and this is where the magnets and the liquid helium, or all the stuff like how do we make that more sustainable? If that paper, and there have been a lot of papers like that in astronomy as well, at observatory sites, at institutions, how do you make them more sustainable? If you a paper is primarily on that, can we make a different subcategory in archive to make it more prominent? So this talk is a little bit about that, or it's about that. It's about trying to make it so that the archive will make it, and it was sort of originated early last year. So we'd like it to be called this, or something like this, physics.env sustainable assessed. And it requires a commitment from researchers and professional societies to submit a certain number of papers. Um, and and so there's this form here that everybody can fill out, both if you think you're going to write papers, especially in this field, or have, and or if you support the idea generally. So the form is quite general that way. So physics informs solutions to sustainability, sustainability of physics as a discipline, and distinguish it from broader environmental science or engineering fields. So this would be at the intersection of physics and sustainability. Um, and so it's where physics models are applied to this, to environmental issues, and how, and again, sort of what I mentioned, how environmental impacts come out, and mitigating them for different infrastructure projects. There is, I will note, a very specific category called like climate uh, uh, something climate physics. So some of those would best go in that category on archive. But not these infrastructure ones, for example. And that's what we've been concentrating on. And that's what the A4E papers have been about as well, sort of sustainability within astronomy and astrophysics. Um, so, so this first category might sort of overlap between both of them. But then the um, second two would be more sort of in this new category. Um, and so we're talking about in scope versus out of scope here. General environmental ones wouldn't go in here. Um, so this is kind of how Archive wants people to go about it. They review papers that are already on the archive that would be better primarily listed into a new subject class, and then they try to get support from the community that would engage with it, and then they need a volunteer moderator. And we have people who might be willing to do that already. So this was an interesting plot, and Hannah made this early last year. This is Hannah Wakeling, who's now in the UK. So she went and used sort of sustainability words and did a query on the archive about how often those words appear, and you can see it's really going up. There's 7,000 in 2024, and 2025. This was only up till the start of middle of the year, so that's why there's less there. And uh, this was I think this is about the same. Um, okay, so um, requiring each preprint to contain more than one keyword has a lower false positive rate, but it still indicates many submissions increase in time. So you'll see up to maybe over 100 in and this is for where they break down their different categories that they've broken down into on the archive. So I'll note this is maybe 100 a year up through 2024 or later. Um, and this is an argument that maybe some of the ones that go to physics and society would be better in physics and sustainability. So this is close to the end. So Archive is supportive, but they need more evidence. And what I did recently here is they've said about 50 papers a week is what is a threshold to make a subject category. So if that's what they're actually going to do, we're going to be below that here if it's only 100 a year. But it's our conversations with them, they've been supportive, but it's not a slam dunk that they're going to do this. So I would just go ahead and ask you guys to fill this form out. If you have any interest in it, it will come to us. Will come to Hannah, and she will analyze it, and that would be useful. So this is again, and there's some supplementary information about topics and what our queries were. You could look up if you wanted. Um, so yeah, so this is generally meta, like how this would be useful in the field and generally. Um, and that's mostly all I wanted to say here at the moment.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
So, questions, comments before we're moving to Martine's talk? Okay, if not, I guess then we start with the next talk. So, today we're super delighted to be hosting Dr. Martine Lokken from DESI collaboration. So she's right now a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute for High Energy Physics in Barcelona, and her research is mainly focusing on the large scale structure, dark energy, dark matter, and she's also active in observational cosmology experiments like ACT, but simultaneously with DESI as well. And I would say that right now she's serving as the sustainability advisor to DESI meetings committee. So we are very excited to hear about her activities, her research, and yeah, like how things are moving forward in DESI. So Martin, please, floor is yours. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation today.
Of course, thanks for having me. Thanks very much. I'm glad to be here. Um, so yes, with this presentation, I wanted to go over some of the work that we've done both on the DESI Sustainability Committee, which was an ad hoc committee that existed the past year, and then now that we're continuing on the Meetings Committee and other ways that we're trying to continue this work in DESI. And particularly, I'd be really happy to hear any kind of advice or input from people in other collaborations working on similar things. Obviously, it's generally, as we've been talking about, a tough time to do this kind of work, and also, yeah, to keep the momentum going forward. But I think it's really important to keep working on it, no matter what kind of changes in government there are, as much as we can, especially because we are in, of course, international collaborations. Um, and I think being able to discuss with each other and know that other people are doing similar kind of work is helpful in keeping the spirits high enough to keep going, and also just sharing like existing resources and tools so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Okay, so I'll start by talking about a little bit of motivation. I don't think we really need this for this group here, but of course, the most kind of direct impact that we're all experiencing by this point is more extreme frequent weather events. like the LA fires, heat waves in Asia last year, a lot of heat waves in Europe last year as well. Just lots of like intense anomalies. There was a lot of intense rains in Spain where I've been living the last couple of years, that caused a lot of deaths in Valencia, for example. Of course, now there's a lot of intense winter storms going on in the US, etc. And just around the world, I think most of us have had either personal sort of scary scenarios to our own health and safety, or we know people who have, or at least, have concerns about homes or other kinds of infrastructure. And in particular, that includes our astro research infrastructure. We've had some damages to different types of observatories, including DESI, because there was a wildfire in the area around Ilo Amduag, also known as Cape Peak, which is where the male telescope is located that DESI runs with. That was a couple of years ago, and I think we have some, no, we don't have more on that, but that was called this Contreras fire. And luckily, DESI made it through. Like most of the DESI infrastructure was okay. It was only a few kind of supplementary buildings and stuff that got burned, but that was because of like hard work of firefighters and some luck. And there were, evacuations in the Tano Odom Nation, for example. So it was scary for the people around there too. And just in general, this is going to be impactful to us directly, as well as, of course, to lots of people around the world who have a lot fewer resources
This
than us.
this picture of Arecibo, I must say, they must be taking the cement out because I remember when the thing fell on it, but it didn't create this. And this looks terrible. So they must be taking the plates out. This is just incidental, but I think that's right, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't put together this particular slide, so I could check with the person who made it.
Okay.
Yeah, this might have been after they started, replacing things. That's
Yeah,
good to know. We could change that to the more accurate one if
it's
that's
okay.
a bit misleading. But of course, I'm preaching to the choir here. We all know these things. And I think many of us also are aware that astronomy contributes kind of disproportionately in terms of our actual number of astronomers compared to our impacts. If you look at astronomy's emissions compared to other science fields, and our astro research infrastructure when looked at in a per capita way compared to, the biggest emitters in the world. And of course, in general, a lot of us fall into these kind of top couple of categories of income earners. Even if you don't think you do, you probably do, because the threshold is, if you're in a country that has like a higher kind of standard of living, the threshold is like not that high to be part of this kind of top 10% or 20%. And of course, the bottom 50% here are contributing very, very little. So
Can I ask a quick
amongst us, we have a
question?
lot of, yes.
While you have this up, this Blanchard et al. is French people, yeah? French researchers, I believe it was based on.
Yes,
Does
that was our
anybody
principal.
know if that has been updated at all for a more international kind of community? No? Okay, because
I do not know.
I presented the same picture and somebody said, well, that's the French, which wasn't quite fair, but Go ahead, Lauren.
I don't know why it would
Laura?
be much different or much, why the French would be particularly higher than anybody else. I would imagine that's kind of representative.
So yes, just a quick. Can you hear me?
Lauren, we can't hear you.
Okay, now.
Yeah.
Better. Yeah.
Yes, okay, I forgot this tool. Yeah, no, I think it's linked to what you're discussing right now. It's I think in the astronomy part, it's not taking into account all the footprint coming from observational infrastructures, right? Because from Jorgen's study, it's 36 tons of CO2 per astronomer and per year. So I think that in this Blanchard et al. 2022, they might not have taken into account this, so it would be way, way, way larger.
Right. I think this is
Actually,
just
actually
accounting for
worse.
the plane travel. So yeah, I agree with it.
Okay. Yes, sorry.
Right.
Okay.
No
Okay, I
worries.
missed this
Yeah,
information.
I think this was more, like focused on the lab activities. I think you're right in
Okay,
that.
cool.
So yeah, it's true. I think if you expand to infrastructure, I doubt these other fields would have anything close to the same amount of like infrastructure, broader infrastructure impacts. So I imagine.
Okay, yeah.
that
Yeah, I
would be
guess then
the
French
things
should be,
outside.
I mean, not much more than other countries. Maybe Australia would be a bit more.
I imagine.
So yeah, like I have a question for you. Do you want to take the questions like while you're presenting, or do you want us to shift it to the end? Sorry, like I just forgot to ask you this. Like which
Yeah,
way
that's
you're
okay.
more comfortable.
If
If
it's
you
on
want
the
to have the
last couple of
discussions in the
slides,
middle, like we can go like this, but yeah, like I mean, if you want, like we can also like shift all the questions to the end.
I don't mind going as we go.
Okay,
So yeah, please go ahead.
perfect. Thank you.
Did you have a question, or was that was the question?
No, that was the question.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah,
No
no
worries.
problem. Please feel free to interrupt me. All right, so given all of this, I think, you know, we all agree we have a responsibility to act here. And with that motivation, and also with sort of higher level motivation coming from the previous Biden administration, the DESI Sustainability Committee was created. So there was this Biden era charge that basically like federally funded organizations should reduce their emissions by 50% by 2030. And so part of this committee's creation was to find ways to abide by that, because a large part of DESI's funding comes from federal sources. But also this came out of discussions at collaboration meetings, also before my time in DESI, of various members really pushing to have a closer look at our emissions and to make action about that. So there were multiple motivations for it, and of course we continued our work as the government changed, because we think it's important. And I'll talk in a moment about the charge and a bit more details about what our committee did. Then I'll go into the details of current DESI emissions, getting collaboration input from this a survey that was sent around to the full collaboration, our work to figure out a pathway to this 50% reduction goal. And then I'll discuss a little bit about ongoing implementations to try to actually make these suggestions a reality. So the Sustainability Committee, which, by the way, I should mention, exists of many more people than me. Their names were on the first slide, and I can always flash it up again later. But we had a chair, Steve Allen, at the beginning, and then later on, Etienne Bertin from Paris. And so the committee was formed in April 2024. And the first thing that we did together was try to make some preliminary estimates of DESI's emissions. After that, we went ahead and conducted this large survey, and we got about 120 respondents, which is pretty good. Our collaboration in total is actually close to 1,000 people, but a lot of those members aren't very active. So in terms of our active membership, this isn't so bad in terms of survey respondents. We did some updates and engaged with other committees and presented to the board. And then eventually we submitted this final report in May of 2025. So it's been, you know, close to a year since the final report was submitted. And that's why at the end I'll talk a bit about the actions that we've done since then. And this was actually an ad hoc committee, so it is currently no longer active. So our first steps, again, were to try to estimate the emissions. And here I'm showing what ended up being our final estimates. So we first divided this into three main categories, which was generally travel. And then another category was telescope operations and everything around that. And then the third category was computing. And that is with NERSC here, because we use the NERSC supercomputer in California. And as you can see by eye already, you see that meetings is taking up a huge part of this, but I'll briefly mention a little bit of the work that went into figuring out these two sectors. So for NERSC, it's not too difficult. Some members of our group were in contact with basically the folks that manage the DESI side of NERSC. And because it's this stuff is very well documented, they can tell like what fraction of NERSC energy usage goes to DESI. And then they have the energy bills for NERSC. And so we were able to figure that out. With mail, it was a little bit more complicated because we can get the energy bills for the mountain, but what we got was, you know, divided into operations for some other telescopes besides just DESI. And so we had to try to like track down exactly what was going to DESI and what was going elsewhere. And of course, the folks on the mountain are just, in general, very busy, keeping things running, doing important work there. So I would say that was a bit of a more challenging aspect, but we ended up with a reasonably confident estimate there. And then in terms of travel in general, what we did for these categories, for meetings, we have lists of the attendees of the collaboration meetings the last few years, and we used 2023 as a baseline. So we looked at our two, these big like single location in-person collaboration meetings that happened that year, and the attendees, we looked at their host institutions to assume that they came from there, and then the destination was the meeting. And you can use some online calculators to see how many emissions that would be, how much emissions that would be, assuming that, you know, above a certain distance, people fly, and below that, they would take the train. Of course, most people fly because it's a pretty large collaboration coming from all over. And so we find that that's a very large fraction of our emissions. This other travel mostly comes from speakers that the DESI board and DESI speaker board will decide to send to different conferences. And so we decided to count that because that's like a DESI organized activity. So there's quite a bit of flights that are contributing a significant fraction there. And then observer travel is pretty small, but there's a few people that actually go to Kitt Peak to observe. So that makes up that last little fraction. But you can see overall that travel represents about 70%. So by and large, reducing flights became our main target with this work.
You know, it's interesting, like how, I mean, I understand how you explain those, but there are other categories like the computers, the laptops people are using at their home institution to do the analyses, buying them, the power for them, the food that people are consuming, because as we know, like vegan food is much different. The food that's being served at collaboration meetings. You could add other categories, but these are the ones you thought of. But I'm thinking, you know, it might be useful for people to think of there is more impact, you know, that might be harder to quantify in some ways at times.
Yeah, with the computing, actually, we did try to make an estimate in the final report of how much computing outside of NERSC was impacting, but we mainly tried to figure out if there were big analyses being run on either on personal laptops or, you know, other centers. So actually, it's possible that this chart, it says NERSC, but it actually includes NERSC plus those other
Okay.
computing resources. I'd have to double check, or it's possible that this number changed slightly when we got that. But by and large, like a huge fraction of the DESI computing is done on NERSC. So I think in the end, it didn't make such a difference in terms of like the percentages. And then with meetings, we did discuss the issue of food at meetings. I don't think we included it in the emissions estimates exactly, but when we were making recommendations for future meetings, we did include discussions of food. Yes, I think I think it wouldn't make such a difference because the flights are so kind of outsized in their impacts.
Yeah.
And, you know, you have maybe a couple of catered meals at the collaboration meeting. It's not so much. But yes, it was part of the discussion in the end.
Cool.
All right. Yeah, thanks for those comments. And there's definitely possibly things that we've missed in this.
And which of these categories is including the facilities carbon footprint? Is there like something like that? Like for
You
each
mean
year
the
or
telescope,
something?
the observatory?
Yeah.
That's the MAIL. So MAIL is the
Okay.
telescope that
So
does
that is like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was
And then
like,
also like Sarah made a great comment in the chat that a lot of the pressures or requirements for on-site meetings come from funding sponsors themselves. Like this is something that, yeah, like I mean, folks are moved around because they're under the pressure of, yeah, like traveling, meetings, etc. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
yeah. Yeah, we can chat about maybe at the end about how to encourage like these alternative types of meetings and alternative cadences. So the next step after we did these preliminary estimates, which again didn't change that much by the end, although we started accounting for a couple more of those details over the year, The next step was to conduct a big survey of the collaboration, both to try to figure out like people's current attitudes about sustainability, what they thought DESI should be doing in terms of actions, and then which types of actions people were most amenable to. And we decided to put a lot of effort into making this survey, in particular, some other members of the committee like Noah Weaver-Dick and Jesse Hahn put a lot of work into this, into really making a survey that not only assesses people's feelings and interest in certain actions, but also educates. So the problem is, in general, with surveying things related to climate motivation, people tend to have a bias towards like short-term goals and problems and very personal goals and problems, and sometimes aren't giving the climate issues the weight that they deserve. And so what we started with was first doing a little assessment of people's current understanding with questions like, how much do you think astro research infrastructure contributes compared to, other fields? How much do you think, our per capita emission is compared to per capita, emissions from this country or this country? And then we followed up that section with kind of the answers to those questions. So people could basically like assess themselves on the spot and recalibrate their intuition if their intuition was off. And so for those who maybe weren't aware of astronomy's kind of outsized impact, they become aware as they're doing the survey and before they get to the part where they're talking about actions. And so I think that was really helpful to get people in the right mindset. Some people might think of that as biasing a survey, but really every survey is biased. And like the point shows above, normally people are biased kind of against thinking about these longer term issues. So we were thinking of it more as de-biasing the survey.
So
And
pretty interesting. I just went to this forum, and I'm quite interested in the report that came out. Maybe you'll get to that. But also, there's on the forum, number one, you gave away 10 DESI t-shirts to motivate people to fill it out, which is
yeah.
interesting. I've never seen that before. And two, you linked to a blog post. DESI has a sustainability blog, but I can't get to it. It's only for DESI members. So I'm wondering if you could make that public or push for that to be made public, because it would be very interesting to other collaborations.
I agree. Yes, this is something that initially we had plans to do a blog post more publicly and everything. And then we were very unsure if we were kind of allowed to do that once the administration shifted, et cetera,
Yeah.
whether the higher ups in DESI would be concerned about like posting these things publicly. I
Right.
think the last I checked, they seem okay with it. So I think it's something we could go forward with. I think also because now the committee is not, doesn't exist anymore formally, like it's only just casual. People are finding hard to find like the time and motivation to keep going with the work. But it's definitely on our to-do list. And that's also why we'd appreciate if DESI would make some aspect of this work kind of a continuing goal of DESI, to give more motivation for people to do that kind of like service work.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree. I think we need to make things more public. We just have to make sure that we're not sharing any kind of internal DESI information accidentally.
Yep.
But yeah, feel free in general to take a look at this form. So yeah, Noah made a version of this that should have removed all of the responses. So it should just show the questions. And yes, please feel free to use parts of it for your own surveys. Maybe just check in if you're copying things word for word, but hopefully it could help anyone who's doing similar work. I saw a couple of questions in the chat. So one of them is how many people and meetings per year are we talking about? So the year that we assessed, 2023, we typically have 2 collaboration meetings per year. One of them was in Hawaii, which was very kind of out of the way for pretty much all of our membership. The other one that year was in Durham in the UK, and around 150 to 200 people attend each meeting. So that was kind of the range. The link, yes, can I copy this? I think that works actually. I'll put it in the chat right now. And yes, please let me know if that shows any kind of personal information from people responding. It shouldn't. It should be all cleared and good. But if it is, then we should quickly change that. So we got pretty good respondents. We got 124. And in general, what we found was that DESI members really want to act. So this question, should scientific projects conform to global UN recommendations, got 83% agreement, you can see from these bars over here. So it was very, very positive, very motivating for this work. And whether or not DESI should consider environmental sustainability decision-making got 93% approval. So we consider this as a very strong kind of mandate from the collaboration to do this work. And that was good because
the other 7% just wanted the shirt.
maybe, yeah, they're good shirts. Yeah, we had a couple of kind of strong opinions and to the contrary to some of these, but you know, there's always someone. Then we asked, you know, we were really trying to make it clear to people that when you look at the places that we can reduce emissions, there's only so many, because people tend to say, oh, well, please don't reduce meetings, do something else, or please don't reduce this, do something else. But we really want to make it clear, there's only so many places, so you have to make a choice. And so we said, you know, if we have to reduce from these main categories, telescope operations, computing at NERSC, or flights, how should we divide that? How should we split it up? This chart's a little bit hard to read at first sight, but what this is saying is that most people wanted to reduce mail and NERSC by only 10% and flights by 90%. And that, you know, combination would get us to that 50% reduction more or less because of the way that those break down, those categories. And then about half of people said, well, not half of people, maybe a little bit less, but said, well, let's just try to reduce them all of a similar percentage. But almost nobody said, let's focus our reduction on the telescope and computing, because I think people recognize like that's where our science comes from mostly. And so we don't really want to cut those like core science operations. We'd rather cut down on flights and meetings. And kind of knowing that that would have to be the main source, we asked a lot about meeting styles. And so we assessed whether DESI should start experimenting with alternative meeting formats. We got a lot of strong support for this as well, 75%. And we also asked whether we should reduce the overall number of our meetings. This also had majority support, but only by, you know, a slight margin. Not so much opposing. Lots of people were neutral to this. But in general, we found quite a few people, I think especially ECS, were kind of in favor of reduction, because these meetings can also be quite stressful and they really push people to meet like deadlines as well before them. So some people find it to be too much in general.
How many does he normally have per year?
2.
Mm-hmm.
1 winter, 1 summer.
Yeah.
But I think especially for people who are in multiple collaborations, they end up going to a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
And you know, even for the one, it could feel a bit much.
Can I bring up a question from chat that like Paulo is asking? So he's like, have you tried to convert the sustainability actions into cost savings for the project? I am asking because I found this is the main driver to convince people this may be useful in my collaboration. We
did, yeah. There was a section, because that was actually a request from the DESI leadership that we try to estimate the cost savings. So there was a section in the report that tried to convert some of the recommendations into savings. I don't remember any of the numbers off the top of my head, but yeah, we made sure.
Was the feedback positive, or how did it work in general?
To the report?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the feedback was pretty positive overall. But yeah, I'll talk in a couple of slides about basically what's happened since the report and how things are going.
Get back to this.
Yeah, I think there's one thing about just like receiving the feedback, and then it's another thing to actually implement, which can be just more challenging. Okay, so going on with meeting styles, we proposed a couple of different types of styles to see how people felt about them. This included fully remote focus week meetings where people basically sprint but online. Independent hubs where there's different hubs that they're not communicating with each other. Concurrent, where you try to have them actually at the same time. some kind of fully remote, full collaboration-wide meeting, some kind of our regular hybrid meeting, but better and less carbon by somehow reducing participants, and then like a regular kind of fully remote. And what we saw in general is people are really not in favor of the fully remote, all collaboration-wide meetings. I think people had some of those during COVID. Not many people really liked them, and they find it just, it's too many people on Zoom at once. It's kind of hard to focus, it's fatiguing, etc. But people were pretty interested in these hub models and also in these sprint weeks, especially you can see this is the response. If you assume you'll have one single location in-person meeting per year, and one of these would be the other one. And then the orange is a response if you assume there's no single location and you only do a mix of these ones. In either case, these kind of hubs plus sprint weeks were the winners. And so we decided to focus a lot on further developing the ideas for that to discuss more in the report. And part of doing that was just estimating the emissions of these different types of meetings in terms of optimizing single location meeting location versus how that would compare to multi-hub models with optimal locations. So each of the bars here shows the estimated number of emissions per participant for a bunch of different cities, some of which we've had meetings in the past and others that we haven't but have been proposed. You can see that, Melbourne would be near a couple of our members, but really out of the way for most of us. That would have a huge impact in terms of emissions. And then it kind of decreases until you get to Toronto or Ann Arbor. So like kind of Great Lakes area, I guess, is sort of the berry center of our collaboration. But using 2 of the hubs that are most optimal here can reduce that by quite a bit, and further with 3 or 4 hubs. So this, I think, helps show people how doing hub models can really help. I should mention one big assumption with the hubs here is that you assume that the same kind of subset attends. So we weren't assuming here that the number of attendees would increase with the hub models. That might not be true. We might actually have more attendees when we do hubs because they'll be probably lower cost and closer by. So that might actually mean that the emissions reduction isn't quite as good as we're estimating here. But we don't really know yet. There's also fluctuations in funding and all sorts of things that might affect this. So we'll actually see when we do one.
I mean, even if it was twice as much, that's significant saving. That's a really interesting plot. And in Europe, people will take trains. In the US, they won't. And this is a more US collaboration, but this is a very interesting plot.
Yeah, and yeah, I think we really try to emphasize to people like we're flying more than ever, but we actually have all these resources to communicate online, and so these types of meetings could be really good. We should be taking advantage of that, and have to put a limit in somewhere. So part of also the work was to discuss with other committees within DESI to make sure that we were trying to hit different goals, not just sustainability. And so thinking about these different types of meetings, we asked what's now called the Professional Development Committee, it used to be DEI, about how they would assess these different types of meetings in terms of things like finding your DESI identity and forming contacts with others, etc. So the hubs and the sprint weeks, which were the most popular ones from the survey, besides the regular, they were ranked just a little bit below the regular single location hybrid meeting that we have. By the way, we do always have it hybrid where people can attend remotely, but the remote attendance, the remote capabilities are always like kind of secondary. So people say it's not as good when they attend remotely. But you can see for some things like access that this regular type of meeting actually does a bit worse in this assessment, and actually something like obviously a remote sprint week or a hub model would have better access. So in the end, this committee ranked pretty highly this idea of having a mixture of a regular classic meeting and hubs or remote sprint weeks. So that was good to show that it's not only for sustainability that we can do this, it's also actually brings some advantages for the meeting experience itself.
Sorry, I didn't. Did you meet in the upper left where it says IP versus O? Can you say what that is? Did you already say that?
Oh, I don't know if I remember what that was for.
Those are totally quite different. Like I thought one might be people ECA.
Oh, in person versus online. So I think they assessed whether you had the full meeting fully online versus our regular hybrid in person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Same for the hubs. We also asked the ECS, particularly the early career scientists, and they actually preferred these mixture of multiple like hubs plus a regular classic style meeting over our usual cadence of 2 classic meetings per year, especially when sustainability is taken into account. So that actually showed us, in general, the collaboration was quite in favor of trying these different meeting styles, both for sustainability, but also for other reasons. So it was really nice to see. And I'll just move kind of quickly through this to make sure I get to the current implementation. So in the final report, to get to this pathway to 50% reduction, we mostly focused on the meetings and tried to envision what kind of combination of meetings we would have to have from now until 2030 to make that goal. And what we suggested is doing kind of an ease into it, where we always have at least one regular single location in-person meeting in 2026, but combine it with multi-hub. Then either keep that one or move to a couple of hubs in 2027. And then over the 2 years beyond 2027, that would start to reduce even more, where we would potentially be combining just a single classic meeting in those 2 years with a combination of different types of meetings. And something like that could reduce the emissions quite significantly, which again, we need to do for the meetings, especially if those other categories aren't being reduced, because the meetings are a large fraction of it, but it's actually not everything. And then combining that with those other categories I mentioned before, we made this estimate that we actually made with a tool that people can use and play around with, which we shared with the DESI membership as well. And this includes assuming a couple of changes to those other categories, but mostly changes to the meetings. So these big kind of breaks in this curve are from abrupt changes in those meeting styles over the next few years. And then this kind of like overall decline that keeps going is assuming that the plans for the Arizona and California grids continue as planned during the Biden administration. But I think these are state levels, so I think they are continuing. And there's a bit of grid reduction, emissions reduction happening because of renewables. And then we assumed that the telescope folks could find a reduction of 6% per year, which doesn't seem to be asking too much. And same at NERSC by increasing computing efficiency and limiting the amount of computing hours that people can ask for. We assumed with these that you'd keep one single location and then sometimes some mix of either hubs or focus weeks, or in the future you go to just these kind of sprint remote focus weeks for the second meeting. Otherwise, you really can't get to those goals if you keep having multiple like in-person meetings. And then we also assumed that that other half of DESI related travel, like the speakers and the observer travel, could be cut in half as well. And those were all parts of our final recommendations, but our main 3 recommendations were DESI should set these clear targets to really adopt the intent to reach these goals, no matter what the political situation is. We should experiment with different meeting styles, and then we should be assessing and reporting progress as we go and have some kind of infrastructure in place to do that. So since this report has been out, I will say number 1 and 3 haven't been totally put in place yet. So there's not been an official vote yet for this adoption of this target. And then in terms of creating some kind of standing committee or standing in situation to assess the progress, that's also still in flux. but it's something that we're still really pushing for, and I think it's possible that that will be put in place. It's just, of course, like leadership has lots of different things to worry about, and there's lots of stuff going on right now in terms of funding and all sorts of things. So it's just hard to keep this in the top priorities of the leadership. So that's something that we're just continuing to push on. But for the meetings, this actually is going forward. And so what we've decided already is that for this coming year, we'll have our regular collaboration meeting in the summer and then a 2-hub meeting in the winter. And so a couple of us have joined the meetings committee to help advise on how to make that 2-hub meeting a reality. And I know I'm running low on time, so I'll maybe just breeze through the situation of that at the moment. There are some particular challenges with running a 2-hub meeting. You have to find venues for the same week. You have to think about tech issues, etc. And then if you want some overlap, of course, you have to think about the time zone. We've done some work to try to figure out sustainable and effective venues, and it looks like we're going to do some combination of Mexico and Paris, maybe Mexico City, potentially somewhere else in North America. But this seems to be promising, and the emissions of those two combinations are pretty low in comparison to having it at any single location. We'll have a little bit of overlap with those two locations, but not that much. And then we need to really make sure that the tech capabilities of the venues that we find are good. And one of the challenges is that for these hub meetings, there's fewer participants. And so the cost, if it's a fixed cost, is divided over a fewer number of people, and that can drive the registration fees up. So we're really looking for university venues that will already have most of the tech capabilities, and that we don't need to pay for the room rentals, for example. We want to make sure, especially with these expectations, that people realize that this type of meeting will be a bit different, but we still want to make sure it's effective. So the style will be different, but we want people to still have good scientific collaboration and, progress in collaboration goals, etc. There's a couple of different things that you can do at one of these meetings. So I've been thinking through what would be better to do during a concurrent session when you're online, and what to do in person. There's some kind of things we could do that we don't normally do, like project generation ideas and in local settings that we don't normally do. And we might actually encourage more cross-working group discussions in these local hubs. We had a kind of small test case with our Alignment Alpha working group earlier this year. It was much smaller than the full collaboration meeting, but it worked pretty well overall, and people were more likely to attend because we did 2 hubs. And so I'll just wrap up to say DESI astronomers are very interested in decreasing our emissions. We've realized that travel is the main source, and so we're rethinking the future of meetings, but we still want these alternative meetings to come along with an effective collaboration, good science, good accessibility, and people feeling welcome and included in the collaboration. So these come with unique challenges and opportunities, and we're excited to keep planning that for winter 2026. So that being said, I'm very happy to take any advice. I know we don't have much time, so please feel free to reach out to me on Slack or by email. And I'm happy to share discussions with others who are doing similar kind of initiatives in their own collaborations, so that we can, share tools, resources, etc. Thanks.
No, thanks so much for this talk. Like, it was amazing. Yeah, like I enjoyed it thoroughly. I hope it was the same for everyone. So thank you so